welcome to the Purpose Podcast. My name is Rachel, and I'm here with my friends Justin and Holly, and we are so excited to spend some time with you today because we believe so much that God has set you apart for a purpose to win your world, and we want to help equip you today to do that. And sometimes walking as a Christ follower is really hard. And we're going to talk today a little bit about the hard stuff, especially today. We're dropping this. It's September 11th. We're remembering an extremely tragic moment in our nation's history. And we want to honor that first and take a moment to say, hey, we're grateful that God is present even when things are awful. And that's what we're going to talk about today. As believers, we encounter tragedy, not just on a scale where it's like, hey, outside of us global, right? We think about tragedies happening around the world right now, war, famine, drought, but then we also think about the heartbreak and the suffering that we experience personally, not just at the hands of others, but then some of our own creation. And so today we want to discuss what it means to suffer with Jesus. So let's just take just a second. Everybody at this table has some different experiences with suffering. And I kind of want to give the people listening and watching a second to catch up so that as we talk about our suffering with Jesus, they have just an idea of what that suffering looked like. So I'm going to shift it up a little bit. I'm going to have Justin just kind of talk a little bit first, because some of the suffering you guys that you've experienced actually crosses over a little bit. Right. And then kind of share just some individual moments. A lot of people have heard my story about miscarriage and infertility. And so I'm not going to recap all that. You can kind of just catch up, listen to more podcasts. You'll hear it all. Subscribe, hit the bell.
That's right.
But so why don't you tell us just a little bit, Justin, kind of, you have this story with your family and some suffering that you guys experienced.
So in 2015, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. So they did operation. They got as much out as they could. They put him on extremely aggressive chemotherapy. And so he went on a 6-week regimen. 5 weeks into it, he had to go to the ER just for unbearable stomach pain, and they got him in, and basically the medicine was so strong that it had eaten away at his insides, and they wound up keeping him in the hospital trying to do surgery on him, and it was just so tough on his body that the surgery wound up just causing him to pass away. And when you, as a young man, especially a young man who views your father as his hero, his idol, that can become a very unanchoring experience for you. Any man, any man has a complicated relationship with their father. Some idolize them, some despise them. But in either way, a father has an indelible impact on their son's life. And so for me to walk through that, it was very it was just shake you to your core. And then fast forward a couple years later, it's just New Year's Day. I'm at home. We have the day off. I'm playing with my kids downstairs. Get a call from my then brother-in-law who says, hey, you need to rush to the hospital. Your sister was just in a terrible car accident. She's been life-starved. Get to the hospital, and you get in that tiny room that no one ever wants to be in, and the lights are dim, and you're surrounded by just people. There was another family in there also, and it's the room where we're basically the news that you don't want to accept is about to be handed to you. The doctor comes in and says, hey, she underwent so much trauma that there's basically no way to save her. And so she passed away a couple days later, wound up actually donating a lot of her organs to 7 or 8 different people around the country. But for me, again, my relationship with my sister was very good. We were beyond just siblings. We were really good friends. And for me, up to that point, when I lost my father and my sister, I had lived very much what I consider now looking back, a charmed life. I had a great family, had great siblings, I had a great job, and God had just continued to open doors for me. And so for me, I had been handed a faith from my parents that had never been tested. One of my favorite things that Pastor Chris says, that now looking back really sticks with me is a faith that hasn't been tested, is a faith that can't be trusted. And so for me, these are probably two of the single biggest faith building exercises of my life. And I can look back at those two instances and say, even though they were tragic and easily those are the two worst days of my life, bar none, I can look back now and see God at work even in the midst of the pain and the tragedy and the sadness and the heartbreak.
And you guys, so it's super, Holly has a story about September 11th, and she'll kind of share her experience here in just a second, but was dear friends with Justin's sister, Jenna. And so that was an incredible loss for you as well.
You called me on the way to the hospital. And I will never forget that day. And it was, like he said, one of the worst days of our life. But there is beauty from ashes, because we got closer. And to the point where we intentionally built a house 8 doors down from each other.
It's true.
And your families are growing together. Your kids are growing up together. There's been beautiful things from that. And we're going to talk about some of the beautiful things and how Jesus was a part of it. Would you share a little bit about, this wasn't your only moment of suffering, about I guess 2 decades earlier, maybe a decade earlier. So you were in New York on September 11th. And I think one of the things, and it's worth noting, is there's suffering that we experience where we have like an idea of what the outcome can be. Like when your dad got sick, there was an understanding and a reckoning with the possibility of death.
Right.
When Jenna died, it was like out of left field.
Correct.
It's one thing to have your heart prepared for tragedy. It's another to experience it when you have no preparation at all.
None.
Which Jenna's death, and then of course like September 11th, that was not. You weren't prepared for that.
Nope, I wasn't.
So would you just tell us just a little bit about what that was like?
Yes. So I was a sophomore in college at NYU, and it was the first day of classes. And you have to know before this, so that was obviously September 11th. Before that, my freshman year, within 90 days, I lost my grandmother, my grandfather, my dad passed away, and then found out my uncle died and my cousin committed suicide, like all within 90 days. So I was like coming from a place already of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like I just was like, what is happening? And September 11th happens, and I was getting on the school bus or the bus from my apartment, and I could see a plane like flying awfully close to the building, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to hit it. And we saw these papers and plastic bags falling, and it was like, oh no, there's a fire, and then I saw the second plane hit. I was on the phone with a girlfriend at the time, just like, hey, something's going on, just like a morning call on my commute, because you had to take the bus everywhere. And all of a sudden they were going to drop signal. I said, hey, tell my mom I'm fine. It didn't hit me. I'm running. And they dropped all signal. They cut off all cell phone communication because they were worried about triggering other bombs on bridges and tunnels. So like that was it. I had to rely on her to tell my mom that I was okay. And I just went into survival mode, and so did everybody around me. So, that's like watching that. And then I also saw the towers crumble. Now, this is like my house, my apartment was 3 blocks away. It busted the windows with the impact. Like there was, so I was homeless immediately. Like they had to like block that out. So I had nowhere to go. My family's all in Tennessee. I'm in New York. And I thought that my roommate had been killed because she worked at the elementary school PS 123 that was right underneath the towers. And I had not heard from her. I had no way to communicate. So I waited for her for 7 hours. We were both on the cheer team, and I ran to the gym because I was like, I'm praying that she meets me here because I don't know, we can't go home. So like, I hope she finds me here in all of New York City. Like, so I'm like, please, Lord, please send her here. So she did. Like 8 hours later, covered in dust and blood, and she was okay. And we just found some other people that we knew and found a place to stay for the night. But there was an immediate situation of thinking imminent. Like we're talking like from my perspective of not being able to see or communicate with the outside world, the biggest city in the world, from my perspective, this is it. The world is ending.
Yeah.
So that's how that day went. And then
That's how that day went.
yeah.
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 Terrible day.
Yeah.
It was a terrible day.
It was a terrible day.
So I think one of the things that is when you hear moments like this, and everybody has it may not be September 11th,
Right.
which I think sometimes I will compare like my experience. I'm like, hey, you know what? I can handle this if you can survive that.
Right.
I can survive this. It's encouraging and like to, maybe in a dark way, but my counselor can deal with that.
Mine is. Yeah.
That's it.
Mine is. And
Hey, it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist.
Yes.
For real, no shame in that game.
for real.
Yes.
So like you have these like crazy moments, and I think we have to just ask the question, hey, God's good. Why do we suffer? And I want us to know that unlike, a person who does not know Jesus, like everyone's going to suffer. The world is broken. Sin entered into existence and it brought along with it suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Bible's very clear that sin is attached to death.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just like eternal death, it's spiritual death, but it's relational death, it's physical death. Like our sin affects us and it affects others. But while the world is like groaning without Jesus, we groan and suffer with hope. Like there's this thing that comes along with while we wait for the final day of redemption, like when creation itself is set free from its bondage to corruption and attains the freedom of glory of the children of God, which is what Romans 8:21 says. Like there is a day coming where everything's going to be redeemed. We have this like precious hope. And so our hearts ache for all things new. And I think this is why, like, when we suffer, there's so much difficulty because Ecclesiastes says that eternity was set in our hearts. And that's every person. And so there's this, like, we cannot reconcile suffering and the Lord unless we are aware of sin and we can look at the hope of a day to come. And until then, like, it's a bummer. Suffering's guaranteed. So, spoiler alert, following Jesus doesn't
Fix all your problems.
No,
No, it does not.
I wish that's what happened. So, as you like walk through these experiences, so like you've got September 11th, you got your dad and Jenna, you both have Jenna. Like, what did you question God? Like, were you like, hey, are you up there? Do you see this?
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yes, I did. So all the scriptures you mentioned were great. I mean, they're great to contextualize. I mean, God's plan was not to give us an easy life. In fact, in John chapter 16, Jesus is talking to his disciples at the Last Supper the night before he's being killed. And he says, hey, in this world, you're going to have trouble, but you can take heart. I have overcome the world. And so when you enter those dark places, I think like you have to ground yourself in what you know is true, because if not, you will feel like the rug has been ripped out underneath you and there's nothing, and you just keep falling and falling and falling. So it was about a week after my dad died, and we had just found out also that we were pregnant with triplets. And I am just absolutely distraught and angry and bitter. And I remember just going into church and pretty much letting God have it. It's like, which again, God can take it. Like if you look in the pages of Scripture, especially the Psalms, Lamentations, some of the things that Moses said to God, like God's tough. God can take it. Like He will never disown you or turn you down if you like in those moments of your deepest grief. Like He will come and find you. And so that was my experience as well. I've had 4 or 5 of these experiences in my life where the voice of God was so clear to me that I couldn't tell whether it was audible or not. It almost felt like it was audible in the room. So I got to the point of this probably 45 minutes of praying, and I finally shut up, and the room was quiet for a second. And I just hear God say 4 words: do you trust me? And I had to make a choice in that moment. Well, God, yes, I do. Like I don't. There's no way that I can comprehend like where this is going or how you're going to use this for my good. Because that is a promise. Like what the enemy intends for evil, that's another promise we can trust. Like God was still used for our good. And so even though the enemy brought death and sadness and despair and corruption and chaos and decay, all these things into the world, these things that the enemy intends for evil, God can still take and use them for our good. And I've seen that in both these circumstances. Like I've been able to reach out and minister to people who've lost their dad, lost siblings, and just spend time with them and say, hey, like, your feelings are valid. God has not abandoned you. Like, I know you're going through it, and that you're probably, honestly, maybe feeling shame or feeling a little bit guilty about the way you feel about God right now. Again, if David could say things like, let burning coals fall on my enemies, and my God, like when Jesus says, my God, why have you abandoned me? He's quoting King David. So like people in the Bible, even Jesus himself, have had these moments where they felt like they didn't know what was going on with God, and they felt almost abandoned. But still, like in those moments, like I found myself crying out to God. And when God said those 4 words, do you trust me? It was like a switch flipped in my mind. I said, all right, I'm going to take this on faith. I don't know where it's going, but.
When I think you said something that's super profound is the shame and the guilt you can feel. The enemy will, and I think like we just have to be aware, like enemy is looking for vulnerability. It's his desire to steal, kill, and destroy the supernatural that God has set aside, like set you apart for in your life. And the intimacy that you have with the Lord, the enemy wants to destroy that.
Yep.
And shame and guilt are weapons of the enemy.
They are.
And so as literally, and somebody who's been delivered from shame, I know it well, like the voice well. And I would just encourage you, what Justin said, like, hey, I cried out to God in the middle of that, and I brought it all there, and he met me. Like he didn't look at my shame and say, well, gosh, you suck. Like you should be tougher than this, or you shouldn't feel this way. The difference was, hey, I'm here and I just want you to trust me. And that challenges, a faith, like just like you said, like, hey, my faith has not been it's been tested now. Like it's being tested.
Yes, it has. Yeah.
Did you have a moment like that, Holly, where you're like, hey, I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you're not even real, or any like a doubt. Did you ever experience any of that?
I did, and this could be like a novel if we like different chapters for all the many traumas that like I got all kinds of flavors. I'm like Baskin Robbins, but for this right here on just like this one, I think because I was angry, and like the whole thing with my dad dying. I had a different experience with a dad, but still when you lose a parent as a child, it is, you feel a little untethered, and unresolved things will never be resolved. And
it's so hard.
And the way your mind goes. So like I was angry for so many deaths so soon. And so I was coming from that place to where I was kind of open when this happened. And I, was so worried that truly the world was ending. I really didn't question him so much then, as much like, Lord, save me. If it's time, like, please, Lord. And I'm like screaming, witnessing to people around me. Right. Like I had no practice in evangelism. I'm like literally screaming at everybody, do you believe in Jesus? And like, please. And so that was a little
that's
bit,
one way.
It was a little shocking because I was like thinking what was happening.
How many people got saved that day? They had to, like, the end will come one day. Man.
But I mean, it was something I would not want to repeat.
Sure.
Obviously. But yes, I did question it because like you see things like I saw people making the choice to jump because it was either be burned alive or jump out and hope for, and like I'm seeing people doing that, and I'm seeing people, and it's just like where are they with that? And I thought if this is happening for all of us right now, like, God, I don't have time to worry about why you're doing this, but like take me to where you are. Is kind of where I was in that moment.
And so after you and you have people in your life who are believers and walk through this as well, and everybody kind of responds differently. Did you have people who left the faith that were a part of your life, or did kind of everybody eventually process it?
Oh, well, first of all, I feel like Golden Girls, picture it, New York. So anyway, it's me, the blonde Southern girl, and I'm like the Lone Ranger in that situation. And a lot of people are either Jewish or Catholic because their parents are, not so much like a
Their culture.
Yes.
Yeah, culturally.
Yeah.
Yes. So it wasn't a whole lot of like places to go for like seeing that relationship. So I had 4 roommates. One, I'm not sure where she went. Like, she's alive, but I don't know where she went. I had one that we became super close, and like I still continue to talk to her about the Lord. And I have one that said, hey, if the world is ending, I'm going to live it up. And she made a lot of choices that are not appropriate for this podcast.
Okay.
So that is...
I don't know. But we've had a few episodes.
people chose different, like people responded differently.
Yeah.
Now, as far as like my believers that were holding me up, like they were at home, like my grandmother, my mom, and I couldn't be with them. And it was rough stuff.
That's super hard. So then let's ask this. Is God good when life is not?
Do you want to go?
Okay. Yes. And I will say the older I get, the more I can see it. And also as a parent, I can see it. Like the puzzle pieces fit in. And at the time, you're kind of like, you know, you can't think beyond the moment when you are in a trauma state. Like when I got that phone call about Jenna, like I literally thought I was never going to breathe again. When I couldn't imagine the next day. So, but like when you remove a little bit from that, you can see how things work together for good. So I'm going to try to do like the comic strip version. So September 11th happens. I really don't know what to do. I want to come back after I graduate and be with my mom for a little bit.
So you stayed in New York.
I did.
Finished.
Yeah. I was going to come home, and then I was just like, you know what? Like, it was a hard thing to explain, and I don't feel like a lot of people here understood, because it was like it happened, it was on the news, and it was out of the cycle.
Right.
So it was like weird for me to be here.
Well, and you're still living it.
Yes.
You're still there. You're still watching. I mean, things are having to be rebuilt. People lost loved ones.
Yes.
This was not just a moment in history. This shifted the entire culture of where you lived.
Yes. So like for my personal reckoning, like I had to stay there. So, but when it was over, I came home and really struggled with kind of adjusting. And then I went to church with my mom, met Jenna, actually talked to Jenna, found him, he scared me, and told me where Jenna was. And then Jenna and I, like, we called it Insta Friends. And we, just a deep instant bond. And then she introduced me to him, and then introduced me to my other Justin, my now husband, and she really pushed for that one, and I was like, okay. And so she taught me about worship. She taught me about coming out of my comfort zone, and so like that relationship led me actually to here and more involved with actual believers, because I was like in a very inward place from September 11th, because I didn't feel like anybody understood. You can't explain that to someone and have them get it.
Right. No.
And so it almost like I wouldn't talk about it, because I just was like, I don't even feel like there's a point. And so she did. That was very healing. Met my husband, had my kids. We have a very cool relationship that's quasi best friend / sibling. And it's just like, I've seen the good in things that have happened from that. Like, I wouldn't have come back at the time I did and tried this church if I hadn't done that. And I wouldn't have met you guys, and just a whole lot of things happen. And you can see things coming from that. And September 11th forces you to figure out, okay, well, I need to be bold about my decisions and my faith and make sure people around me are. And you can see that God is good in all the things from a bird's eye view. You can't see it in the moment.
No, you really can't. I think our human tendency is to make God in our own image. And with that comes, like, we project our own perspectives on what's good and right and just onto God. And when we do that,
That's so good.
we attribute things that are of this earth to things that are not of this world, like things that are in the spiritual plane. Like, God is goodness and justice embodied, personified, right? Like, God is not just good. Like, God doesn't just do good things and just things. He is goodness and he is justice. And so, like, in those tragic moments, like, you kind of get pulled back down into the things of this world, and you sink down into yourself and look at your own perspective on what you think is good and what's just and what's right, and you start looking at it, but what's good and what's just and what's right for me. And that takes your eyes off the Father. And you have to release that and understand that, like, if you really trust that God is goodness and he is justice and he's light, he's life, he's truth, all these things embodied, then there's a part of that we may not ever be able to understand. And walking through tragedy, like, that's part of that. But there's a good at the heart of that is working to make us more to the image of Christ.
That's so good. And you guys have kind of touched a little bit on it here and there, but I want to talk a little bit about how you experienced healing, because you made an intentional choice, and you said, like, hey, like, I came back and I had to deal with what September 11th, like, caused me to, like, look at my entire life and make some decisions about who I am and who I want to be and the decisions I'm going to make. And I mean, like, when you talk about, like losing your dad, and then Jen, like, hey, looking at the Lord and saying, hey, I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know that I even like you right now. And your job, like, you're a pastor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And people may not know that. Like, Justin's on our staff here, and we're
not perfect. Please don't expect this to be.
No, and we but you guys have kind of danced around, like, this fact, like, hey, like, I had to make a decision. I had to reconcile with the event that I experienced, that it was not God. Like, he is outside of this event, and now I have to learn how to walk with him in it. And that is really, really hard. I think a lot of us can live in the brokenness. I mean, I talk about, like, the differences in my miscarriages, how I responded. Like, the first time I was like, I had so much grace. It's like, the Lord's just good, you grieve. And then I was like, the second time I was super angry and spent a bunch of money, and I was real angry for a long time. And our credit card got some use. We all cope different ways.
Hey.
And
retail therapy.
Retail therapy.
Like, we all self-medicate. We really do.
To an extent. And so I would say, like, hey, when you experience these moments of suffering, and it's never what you planned, or it's certainly, if it comes out of left field, especially, now I have to learn how to walk with the Lord in it. And I have seen this in my own life. Sometimes I, like, immediately run to the Lord, and then sometimes I'm like, I don't want to talk to you right now. You and I are not friends, which never goes well for me, honestly. It extends my suffering.
It does, yeah.
And the Lord is gracious.
He'll wait.
He'll wait. He's merciful. He doesn't, that's...
Anytime you want to come
back. Yeah, and I think that's what's so good about, like, recognizing how massive God is. He doesn't need you. Like, he's not...
But he does want you.
He does want you. He's not codependent.
Right.
He's not, like, emotionally disturbed because you don't want to talk to him right now. He is steady. And so what are some of the tools that or some of the ways, like, maybe even, like, thought processes you started to adopt, or, hey, this was the experience I had. So let's say somebody is walking through, like, they're in the middle of it. Hey, my sibling just passed away, or my husband was just diagnosed with cancer, or, my parents just died, or they got divorced, and, like, my whole life feels like it's falling apart. Like, hey, if you're in the middle of the hard stuff, you're suffering, what would you say, hey, here's some things that I experienced that helped me heal? And I think that, or here's an experience I had that helped me walk with Jesus in the middle of this.
Yeah, I would say the biggest tool for me was being intentional about letting other people in, because that's not my natural way. Both you guys know me pretty well. I'm gonna retreat into my own head and try to solve the problem, like it's a calculus problem or something like that. Like I was a math major, so like every life is a problem to be solved, right?
Was that like a suffering also?
That's dramatic.
In a different way. Yeah, my building didn't have air conditioning back in then, so I was back in the before
talking about
time.
math in general. It's terrible.
So, anyway, so like for me, like my tendency is just to retreat into my head and try to like into my mind palace and like try to sort this thing out. And there's just these things are so far beyond our capacity to sort or make sense of, or there's no balancing the equation. And so for me, it is community, and it's community in two ways. In the moment, being honest and vulnerable with people, and your natural instinct, especially if you're a little bit more introverted, is to want to pull back on that and say they're going to reject me. But the people that care about you most, that will bring you closer to them when you open up and you process and you're honest with them, and honest about even the negative and hurtful feelings that and the gash that's been made in your faith through this whole thing. And then the second part of that community is you will find healing in being that person for someone else. And walking with my friends, who I got to pray with, just a sweet friend, right before she got ready to leave. She just lost her dad and came to a worship night and was absolutely just broken, crying her eyes out. And got to pray with her for a long time, talk to her for a long time about my experiences. Guy stopped me after church one time and said, "Hey, I'm walking through losing my mom. Like, what did you do?" And like, I don't have magic answers. Like, there's no formula for it, but I can just share my heart and check back a couple days later and say, "Hey, I love you. Like, just grab coffee if you ever want to talk about it." Same thing, friends who've lost siblings. I got a buddy who plays drums who lost his brother in a terrible way, like very unexpectedly, similar to me. And we went and grabbed lunch one day just to process, because it's, again, it's nothing you can make sense of. But there is a healing that comes in being open. We were never designed to just be isolated people. Like, we make a big deal about how our religion is an individual experience, especially in like the Western Christian Protestant world. Like, individual salvation and your individual relationship with God, and we've almost lost a little bit of the importance of the communal aspect of our relationship with God. And so pursuing that is good medicine in a lot of ways. That obviously you do the work on your own, rebuild your own faith, spend time with God, pour your feelings out, but do it alongside people who love you and will be there to support you. And honestly, that's the biggest source of healing that I found.
Same. We are wired the same in that way. And I will say, if you are in that dark muck and mire right now, and the Sunday school answer is you should go to Scripture and you should go to Jesus right away. But if you are in that deep pit of hurt and you're questioning and you are angry, and you don't know what the next step is or how to survive it, that's probably not what you're going to do naturally. You're going to be crying out. So as a natural introvert, as he is, you have to get other people, your safe people, that will let you act and be honest and love you no matter what, and speak truth to you when you can't do it to yourself. And that is so important, because I firmly believe that our tests, it's hard to say plural, our tests become our testimony. And like, it all goes together for me. Like, I see like an orchestra, like the fellowship piece of our faith is built upon relationships and rapport that should point you back to the kingdom. So it's important that you have put in deposits in there before. So like, there's been times when like I haven't even had words, and like, even with the Jenna stuff, like her birthday is around September 11th, so it's like there's a whole lot of dreams and feelings, and like I've like just shown up in his yard before and like not even had words, and he just comes out of the house and holds me while I cry, like stuff like that. Like, you need your people, but I also, like, you're asking about like how to deal with this. I make myself take action steps. So like, I will make myself get in Scripture and have somebody hold me accountable, and then I try to do something that forces me to find the joy and a honoring tradition. So flipping it, making the bad good and using it, because like you were saying about your miscarriages, like I've been there too. And like whatever our series was, I guess last fall, about spiritual gifts, and I didn't know it was one. What's the one I am that we didn't know it was one? Like mercy.
Mercy.
Okay, so like I have this thing that like it just tells me what to do in those dark things for other people. And like I said, 31 flavors. I've been through a lot of different things, so I've been able to be a lot of different things to different people. And I'll just go over to somebody I've never met before, and the Lord will just tell me like what we're praying about.
He'll give you a word of knowledge.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's been cool to be used that way. But like for other things, like just tangible things, like we've made traditions of things for Jenna that she used to do. And on September 11th, I watch Muppets Take Manhattan every year because that brings me joy. And that's my happy New York. So that's what I do. But like you also need to continue, like put in deposits in your spiritual bank. So when you do hit the low points, you know where you need to go to in Scripture. You need to have things written where you can see them. And I write down in my journal, like, hey, this happened. You talked about your jar that you guys collect. We do
miracle markers.
Yeah, and I go back in my journals and can see like this is when I was really in a valley and I didn't think that would come true. And oh my goodness, like 7 of these are answered right now. So it's important to just do that, because I will forget and be very emotional and in the moment. And it's important to tie that back, and people can tie you back. And it's important to have people that you can be truly known with and want the same hope for you and know the same hope so they can believe for you.
Well, and you made a good point. You know, sometimes we wait until we're in the middle of it, and that is like not the season. I mean, it's an unrealistic expectation to be in the middle of your dark place and then be like, hey, you need to come just be like somebody's just going to come find me and be my support right now. That's just not how relationships work. And I think it's really hard as we have a generation coming up that didn't do a lot of interpersonal relationships. Everything's built first virtually. So it is really hard to do that, even more so, especially if you're Gen Z. And so I just want to encourage you, like, hey, what they're talking about sounds like the worst thing ever. Like, well, I'm not going to sit in a room with someone and tell them what's wrong with me.
Right.
But and we're like fine to go get a counselor, but not someone that's actually going to be in our circle. And so I think obviously like, hey, therapy is helpful. If you don't have a person in your life though, that actually eats a meal with you, that knows what's going on inside of your heart and mind, I think that that's something you need to take to the Lord, and you need to start making some relationships. Because a therapist can only love you one way. Like there's a lot of boundaries, there's a lot of lines. Like that person is not going to come and hold you in the middle of the night at your house. No. You know what I'm saying? Like
the example I gave my sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just like, hey, you can't just show up at their house and be like, today is the worst, and sit on their couch.
Right.
You have to pay them for their time and make an appointment.
The example I always tell my kids is like we went to Sky Zone, and it was with my 5-year-old, and he went up to I don't know if you've been there, the ginormous slide.
Oh, yeah, the jump jam, yeah.
Well, I was not prepared for how big that was, and it was like the goofy thing where it's like, oh! And so like he goes down the slide, and it is like a huge jump, and he gets off. Well, we have our whole relationship tells him in his core that was scary, and he immediately runs to mom. So like you immediately go to your parent. If something is scary, we should immediately run to our father. And it's like I try to tell them that like we want to invest in that and in relationships with other people, so they don't freak out when you show up in their yard or start crying.
And like you feel like you can say with like, hey, my flesh is going to show up, and I need you to help me feed my spirit.
Yes.
Because the flesh, like my spirit is willing, but my flesh is weak. And when you're vulnerable and in a place of like darkness, there have been moments where, you've said things to me, and Zach has said stuff to me, and like looked at me and said, hey, like, I know this is hard, but you have to get up. Like you have to get up, and it's like, I'd like to stay.
I don't want to get up.
I don't want to get up. I want to be mad and pitch a fit forever. But at some point, we have to make a decision just like you said, like God said, do you trust me? and we make a decision to trust God. And so I would say if you're like, hey, I'm in this dark place, maybe you've been there for a while, you might struggle with thinking that you're the only one suffering. You might think that you suffer more than others. And I would say if you're a believer, a lot of times we ask this question, well, I'm suffering more than people who don't know Jesus. Like,
Right.
what is happening?
Right.
I thought like I'm on the good side and that's, the evil side. But Jeremiah 12:1 says like, why does the way of the wicked prosper?
I know.
You're like, what is happening? But
Don't care for that.
yeah, I don't like it either. But the sun shines on the wicked and the good.
That's right.
And so I would encourage you to reflect on what thoughts you are having. Like, hey, what am I thinking right now? Write them down so that you can see them on a piece of paper. It's way easier to look at something and say, well, that's insane, if you look at it on a piece of paper.
When you have it written out, yeah.
When it's in your head, you're like, this makes total sense.
Say that again, but slowly this time.
But when you write them down, when you look at something on paper, it's something about it being black and white. And you can say, oh, hey, this isn't truth. And that gives us a direction to go. And then, but praying, taking, just like, Justin said, what, Holly said is, hey, like, I went to the Lord. And there are facets of God you only experience in suffering. So I have never, I had not known, much of my life was like Justin's. Like, I didn't experience a lot of loss or whatever until there was just this season of my life where it's like, my grandpa died, my brother gets arrested, and, and then I lose a baby, and like all of these things are happening, pow, pow, pow. And I'm like, this is a lot. And when you go to the Lord, you get to experience the kindness and the mercy of God like you've never experienced. Outside of like when you're on the mountaintop, it is great and you do experience the goodness of God. But when you're in a dark place and the kindness of the Lord is like, he's just sweet. Like that's just like the only word. It's just like, there's just this precious space that you only experience being sustained by God if you go through the valley. So don't miss and I know that's like the worst thing. It's like, don't miss what God's doing right now in like the worst moment of your life. But also like really like, hey, God is there and you get to experience him like maybe you never have before.
So true.
So we want to ask God to use the things we're experiencing to draw us closer to him. Even if I just love you're like, I force myself. Like you might need to force yourself to write that sentence as you're praying, God, help me to come closer to you. But then I would say there are several actions we can take.
Yes.
One is I say read Psalm 37 if you're in a bad spot, and take comfort in the many ways you are assured of God's attentive time. He is so present and so kind to you. So we want to read scripture, but there's a practice called lamenting that I did not learn about until I had walked through several different things, and a counselor said, hey, have you ever lamented before? I was like, I've read Lamentations. But lamenting is this honest expression of our sorrows, which is what you did when you're hey, I just laid it all out before the Lord.
If it wasn't important, I know you joked about Lamentations, but why would God put a book of the Bible? if
Seriously.
I'm serious. I know that sounds silly, but
and a third of the Psalms are Lamentations.
Right. It's okay. It's it's a natural. He made us. He knows how we are, and we're not supposed to bottle it up.
That's right.
He can receive it all. He doesn't just want to hear thank you, I'm sorry for my sins. He can take the hard stuff too.
Well, you can Google how to lament, but it literally is just 4 things, and you could just do 4 sentences if you're not a writer like Holly.
It's not good. I just write it.
It's not good. I just write it. You can say there's it's 4 phrases of turning to God. So acknowledging that God's there, sharing your complaint. Appealing to God, telling him what you need from him, and then confessing your trust. And you can see examples of it. Psalm 13, Psalm 22, Psalm 88. These are all places where you can see this. Right. So we can reflect, hey, what are the thoughts that I'm thinking, and write them down so that we can look at them. We want to obviously talk to God, pray to ask him to use what we're walking through, but we want to share honestly with the Lord. You can lament. And then a counselor of friends is really good. Some of us get to a place though where we need somebody who is outside of the experience entirely to speak into us. So I recommend hey, you might need a counselor. You probably need to talk to a counselor. Everybody experiences stuff, and a lot of times we're recognizing the millennial generation and then bringing it down. Hey, we were never really taught how to process some of these things. Right. It was just white knuckle it and move on, which for a season worked. But now there's this desire to actually finish the experience all the way to gain closure.
Your body gets stuck in trauma mode if you're not careful. And your body, your body has instincts that are designed to help you survive and save you in those moments. But the longer you let that trauma go unprocessed, your brain will almost get locked in that mode.
Well, and your brain does rewire itself.
It does,
due to trauma.
Yes.
And so it's important. Like you said, therapy is. It's not a substitute for real Christian community, but it will help you figure those things out, because otherwise you get in trauma mode and just stay there for the rest of your life.
That's right.
If you don't deal with it.
So. And I was just going to add, PTSD is so real.
Very.
And I am someone who struggles with that right now, and it shows itself in fun ways like ADHD and all that. But and anxiety. But one thing is that if you kind of know your triggers and you don't allow the enemy to use that as a door or a window. So if I know, for example, at a UT game, if there's going to be a flyover, if I know that ahead of time that a plane's going to come really close, I can deep breathe through it. If not, I have a physical response to that.
Right.
My body, whether I think I'm okay or not, will start shaking and sweating, and I'll start crying. If I know ahead of time, I can talk myself through it. I can pray through it. I can make choices that are so it's okay if you have triggers and let yourself know how to respond. You can't have control over what happens to you, but you can have control over how you respond. And we want to respond going towards Jesus.
Yes.
So
good. That's so helpful. I want to leave us with this scripture. It's 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. And it is such a good gift. God is, He's worthy of praise even in our darkest moments. He is present, and He brings comfort, and He looks at us with compassion. And I'm so grateful that that's the God I serve. And I can demonstrate that to the people. I can literally win my world in the midst of my suffering because this is the God that we serve. So we are so grateful that you took time to listen today. And we are praying for you, praying that you would walk in victory and you would experience all the compassion of God in your dark moments, and that you would be able to offer that compassion to the people around you who are walking through difficulty, that they would see the goodness of God. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time.